Hello, everybody. Welcome to Woe Nelly Media's Wine and Reads live Q&A. We're going to be taking questions live, but we've also prepared a list of questions for new writers. Here, I'm going to let everybody kind of tell you a little bit about their background in writing. But so actually, I'm not going to go first. Let's start with Lena. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing well. So yeah, my name is Lena. I am a writer. I live out in Los Angeles, California, although now I'm down in Redondo. And I've been writing shorts and screenplays and pilots for a while, rather independently. And right now I'm working as a creative developer for Mattel, working on digital content for them, developing short form series and one-offs and music videos and all that jam.
Awesome. Great. Jonathan?
Hi, I'm Jonathan Samuel Eddy. I'm a teaching and performing artist. I am a spoken word artist. I write primarily poetry, but a lot of my time is spent teaching young people how to use their voices. So, yeah, I teach a lot of young writers.
Awesome. Megan?
Hi, Megan Noel Cowgill. I've been writing plays probably since college. I mostly now do comedy sketches with my husband. We do a comedy troupe called Future Comedy. We mostly did live performances, so of course COVID's put a damper on that, but we're working on getting some other media out there. I also am a teaching artist. I teach mostly tech and props, but sometimes I work with kids on devised works. So
awesome. And Liz?
Yeah, hey, I'm Liz. Currently living in Los Angeles and getting my MFA in TV writing from Chapman University.
Awesome. And my name is Duryea Rashad. I have a BFA in directing, mostly with writing. I started writing in 2010. I'm pursuing writing as a career. Mostly I write novels and screenplays. I've not been producing a screenplay yet, but that's the goal. Okay. So basically today, what we're going to do is we're just going to take some questions. If you're watching and you have any questions about writing that you've always wanted to ask, hey, I'm a new writer and I really wanted to know, just ask us in the comments. And, you know, if we see the question, we'll answer it. But we've also prepared questions. So what we're going to do is start with, I'll just have everybody pick a question. Everybody will respond to the question and then we'll move to the next one. So in the same order that we just introduced ourselves, we'll go through our first question. You muted. What's wrong?
There we go. Sorry, I was pulling up the Facebook one too in case anyone dropped any questions there. Hi. Okay, so the question that I have prepped, I talked to my husband about this because he's also a writer, and the questions that we were focusing on was primarily around notes, because I think that is a really emotional experience for a lot of writers, especially new writers. And so I wanted to pose the question, when do you need to implement notes and when do you not need to implement notes? That's kind of the split that I wanted to talk about, because there's kind of two sides to the story for me, where on the one hand, if you are working for someone, if you have a client, if you have been hired, if you are writing something for someone else, and they give you notes that you don't agree with, you got to find a way to make it work. They are the person who has commissioned this work, whether it's, you know, whatever media it's in. However, I feel like a lot of times when it's our own IP, intellectual property, when it's our own original idea, we can feel somewhat beholden to notes, and you're not. If you're getting a lot of feedback and you agree with it and you want to implement it, great. If you don't have to. So I just wanted to open up that discussion a little bit. You know, if anyone else has any questions about that experience of going through notes. For me, it's kind of like the stages of grief. When you get feedback where you kind of get like angry or you are in denial, and then eventually you come around to like, oh, I can make that work. And I'm sure some of the other writers have similar experiences with feedback.
Anybody can go. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll hop in. No, I totally feel that, and I think that you're right that it's important to kind of look at like what the writing is for. Like if it's your personal project and you're getting notes for or if it's being developed for a company or a client, it's a weird thing to sit in. I took a class over the summer, and I had a teacher that kind of talked to me a little bit about notes and receiving them. And his advice was, regardless of whether or not you agree with the note, somebody saying anything about that particular spot is indicating that something is wrong there. There's just a little flag, something is amiss. And whether or not you take their specific note or you find a way around it to fix whatever's uncomfy in that spot, that's the thing to keep in mind, more so of like, my note is correct always, with certain exceptions being given for like clients when you have to follow the note, and it is what it is and you have to make it work. But I think if it's your personal work, then you can kind of look at it and be like, okay, so what's the note behind the note? Like, what am I actually being told here? And then approach it from that way. So that's the way that I approach it. But I'd be curious to hear everybody else's opinions.
I'll hop in on this one. I struggle with this all the time, because I think that when someone gives you a note, it should be taken whether they're like Stephen King or just some random person, because the random person is the consumer, and they're going to be the one reading your material, and they are important in that process. So I always take it in consideration. Okay, where was this person coming from? And I try to filter it through this lens of my goals as a writer. My goals as a writer is, so sometimes people don't like things, but they work. Point in case, if I have a character who's always like burping and someone's like, oh, that really grossed me out that character's always burping, and I'm in my head like, well, that's what I wanted you to be grossed out by, that character, then that's the difference between just a personal preference and a writing note. But if someone's telling you, yeah, but him burping so much distracted me from your main story, then that's maybe a note that you would want to take. So it's just about finding that balance.
And I think it's important when you get someone to take notes from you to ask different kinds of people, like people that like sci-fi and fantasy, people that are from different age categories. You want people your parents' age and your grandparents' age to also maybe give you feedback on it, as well as somebody from like I'm a millennial, somebody from Gen Z. You know, I think it's important to get a varied audience, because then you get different perspectives. The way I watch something is going to be different from the way you watch something. So
with my work as a teaching artist and with the organization I run, I'm often in the place of giving the notes. So I totally have been the skeptical of sharing and getting feedback and just hearing it, because, you know, naturally we are our worst critics. So we're just assuming that everybody's going to hate it even more than we already do. But like I tell the young people that I work with, that the note doesn't necessarily mean that something's wrong. It means that there is something there. It means that there's something to explore. It means that this piece can live and exist outside of your head. You know, just take the note. You know, well, not necessarily take the note, because I agree with you know, everybody's take on that, but definitely be open-minded, you know, and look into it. It doesn't mean it sucks.
Durye's muted.
That's funny. That was great. So let's actually go to Jonathan. Do you have your first question?
Okay, so my first question is something that I don't think that a lot of artists take into consideration, writers, whatever you're doing, performers. What is top on your self-care regimen? How are you taking care of yourself, especially now? And do we answer the question first?
Right.
That's a big one.
Self-care, that thing, yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll answer it first. For me, music. I always have music playing all day. There is a soundtrack to my every moment, from lunch to dinner to whatever. There's always music. So music has definitely been a balm and definitely an inspiration if I run into any like writer's blocks.
Yeah.
That's great.
For me, self-care always comes from taking a break and forcing myself to take a break. As much as this might sound crazy, it's like playing with my dog or literally just taking a drive to the grocery store, especially when I find myself needing inspiration, because you never know what you're going to run into. You just change your circumstances, change your settings. I know as writers, we all have that space where we go to write. That's just our comfortable space. But then you might get stagnant there. So just throwing a new catalyst into the mix for me is how I care for myself, and allowing myself a little time to indulge in rest.
I think that's an interesting point, Duryea, because I have a friend who's a painter. He's a really great painter. His name's Joshua Jarrett. Check him out online. He does commission work. It's amazing. But he told me about this movie, Kiki's Delivery Service, which is by Studio Ghibli. I don't really know how to say it. I feel bad about that. But she is a witch, and she forgets, spoiler alert, she forgets how to fly, right? Mm-hmm. And she meets another painter who's like, yeah, sometimes I struggle with painting. She's like, but I find if I just don't even think about painting, if I go on a walk or I do something else for a long, long time, I remember how to paint. And that's what happens to Kiki. She forgets how to fly and then doesn't think about it for like a week. And then suddenly she finds herself flying. So I think that's just such a great, and all the credit goes to him for pointing that out to me, but it's such a great analogy for like being an artist and making sure you take those breaks, like Duryea said. So
I'll go.
We're staring at each other like,
I know it's yeah. For me, I think it's making sure that I'm not so stuck in my head that I'm forgetting my basic needs. Because if I'm really, really into whatever I'm working on, I will sit in front of the computer for hours and I won't eat food, I won't drink water, I won't walk away, which is a problem because I get sucked in and I'm like, okay, let's do the zone thing. So for me, what I've been trying to do recently is practice what's called the Pomodoro technique, which is it's an app. It looks like a little tomato. You work for 25 minutes and then you take a 5-minute break and then you hop back in for 25 minutes and you kind of stagger it out. So that way you can take the time away and take a step back, come up for air and breathe, walk outside, not look at the news.
Don't do that.
And make sure that you're living your healthy life and you're not sacrificing that for your creative drive. So that's what works for me.
Now, what was the name of that app again?
The Pomodoro, Pomodoro, I believe is what it's called.
Okay, I need that in my life.
Yeah, dude, like it changed everything for me because I'm so easily sucked into stuff that I won't leave for hours. But if I set a timer, then it's so much easier.
So is that an app for the whole day or just your working period? Because I can't imagine that working with my child, but
sure.
Maybe it's just for a period of time.
Yeah, I mean, you can set how long. The basic gist of it is 25 and 5. So however often you want to repeat that.
Okay.
Really, yeah.
That's cool.
It's just making sure that you have those segmented work times. So yeah.
They literally have an app for everything.
Of course they do.
Oh,
yeah. I mean, but you could also set your own if you had any interval timer. Like people that work out use interval timers to do like your sets and then your rests. And so if you want to make it longer and do like 30, 35, 45, just get any interval timer and do that.
That's smart.
So for me, it's kind of separate as far when I think about self-care for like the work that I do and self-care for just mental rest and recharge. I highly recommend if anyone's out there struggling with writer's block or creative block, I recommend The Artist's Way. A lot of you have probably heard of it or read of it. Read of it? What did I just say? Read it?
That works. That works.
It's a really beautiful book that goes into how to kind of keep your creativity going. It's got a lot of prompts. It can get a little religious. So one of the pieces of advice I was given, if you don't want it to go there, is every time it talks about God, just think of it as the force. And so that's something that book goes into that I have carried with me is taking care of your genius. As if your genius is like a person or like this creature inside of you that you have to like feed and take care of. And it talks about taking yourself on genius dates and going out and finding something that inspires you to feed that inner genius inside. And now with, you know, like, I don't know about you guys, but out here in Los Angeles, I'm still fully quarantined. And so that kind of has changed. You know, I'm not going to like go out to a museum and walk around with a bunch of people looking at beautiful art. But I can feed my genius in other ways. That can just be like watching The Old Guard on Netflix, which is a wonderful movie that I highly recommend. Reading a bit of a book and getting inspired by some of the writing, going back and watching some of your favorite things, like just finding the things where you're like, I'm inspired by this, I'm going to touch base with it. And when you're doing things like that, not only like, don't feel guilty about taking breaks from work, because you're always background processing. You might be working out something in almost your subliminal mind that's going to solve that problem that you found yourself in your script or in your piece. So always give yourself grace when it comes to taking those breaks. And then as far as self-care for like Lena the Human, I love baths. I love baths.
Yes.
Like giving myself like a good hour to just zone out in a nice bath full of smelly goods. Highly recommend.
Awesome. We actually have a question from a viewer, so I actually want to go ahead and ask that question. Shelly McCoy asks, she says, hey, so glad I stumbled onto this. I'm so glad you did too. So she's been working on a children's story and she just started to send out to literary agents. Can any of you touch on your experience with this or your experience with publishing your work in general? That's a great question. Especially today, because self-publication is so possible. You don't necessarily need a literary agent. It's interesting though, because I think I can't be sure if children's literature has a different type of agency platform than regular literature. I don't know that answer, but I do know that I would suggest, depending on what you wanted the book to do you want to have a lot of creative control? Do you want to go over, like, do you want to be able to find the artist for your book? Do you want to do all these things because you want to have that control? If so, I would suggest self-publication. You have a lot more control, but then you're also responsible for promoting the book, press tours, all that stuff is going to be in your hands too. If you have that kind of capital, do it that way. And then, you know, it's all your money. But if you want to have that, not machine, for lack of a better term though, if you want to have that power behind you of a publication, you're going to have to be willing to bend one way or another with whatever rules they want. Sometimes with novels, they will take, sometimes they want the whole thing read, sometimes not. So with that, I would just suggest going to copyright.gov. There's two ways to get your work protected. One is like actually getting it copywritten, but the other one, I can't really tell you specifically. I was researching it recently, and it's basically like a temporary hold on work that's unfinished, just so that you can protect that work. So I hope that answers your question, kind of, sort of, but some other panelists might also have some tidbits about that. I think Liz does. I know she does.
Well, it's funny because I have a self-published children's book, and I got very lucky in that I knew an illustrator who was willing to help, and so that just kind of fell together nicely. The downside is that no one ever saw it, really. It never got any traction, and so it never sold, and it was kind of a bummer because I still don't know how that world works, if I'm being truthful. My knowledge of literary agents, I don't have one, but it's my understanding they look for a body of work more so than one piece. But I very could be wrong about that, and I'm sure somebody has better advice than I do, because unfortunately this is not an area that I have a ton of knowledge about.
I'll just toss out something that I think you should look out for. And that is, you might get some responses where they want to charge you to read your piece. I know a lot of people who've had the experience of paying professionals to read their work and get feedback on it. That's something that I would watch out for. I'm not going to necessarily say that you should or shouldn't do it. I think it's a personal preference, and it depends on your means and your budget for it. If that's something you really want, is to know what they think and you're willing to do that, go for it. but don't feel pressured to do that, because I feel like there's lots of other ways to get the feedback that you're looking for. And yeah, again, similar to what Liz said, for like my experience in screenwriting, it's more about a writer's packet. And you have like a variety of things that you want people to see as far as who you are as a writer. But the prose world is very different. Often you're looking for a team member for that one piece. And they're like your partner in that, right? It's a little different. I mean, you might continue to work with them on multiple pieces, but I think what you're looking for right now is you're looking for that perfect partner for this book. And so look at the things that they have worked with other people, look at the caliber of writers, maybe try and follow a lot of their other writers on Twitter and see what their experiences are like. I have found a lot of professionals will engage in social media, especially on Twitter. So, if there's some literary agents, who have a Twitter presence, I would follow them. And don't be shy about, reaching out and letting them know that you've sent them something. And yeah, I mean, if you can get some sort of proof of concept for the type of art that you're thinking of, I think that would be particularly helpful with a children's book. But I don't know if that's, that might not be a must, because that could also be pretty expensive. So yeah, that's kind of what first comes to my mind with that.
Did anyone else want to hop in on that question? Just a note, Shelly, if you're still with us, there's a group. This group is found on Facebook. It's called the Writers Room. It's a group. If you join that group, there are people in there who are published and recently were selling books on Kindle and Amazon. So if you go in there, feel free to join and be part of that community, and you'll get a lot of questions answered. Okay. All right, Megan.
Real quick, sorry. I also I just asked Sean, because he has gone through the ringer with sending novels out to literary agents, and he said that one thing that you want to be sure to have with it is a query letter, which is essentially kind of like your statement letter, cover letter, explaining your point of view as a writer and who you are, and the piece that you're showing them. So that way, it's kind of less of a cold call with the manuscript. Okay, moving on.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Shelly, you're very welcome. Glad you were here. Megan, what's your question?
My question is, what kind of investments as writers have you guys made, like in education, I would say an important investment, I would say, is have a writing space, buy a desk, another important investment would maybe be books that contain lessons from people you admire. So like I, have read writing books by David Mamet because I like his plays, like things like that. Not just him, but, what would you guys suggest, I suppose, is my question, especially those of you that have worked at a more professional level than me, for sure.
I mean, I'm in grad school right now, so that's definitely the biggest investment ever. I don't recommend it for everybody. For me, I felt like it was a necessary thing because I didn't have a lot of prior knowledge in all of this, and especially for the film aspect of it, because I worked in theater for so long. And so I wanted to be in an immersive environment where I was very conservatory based, like one-on-one attention, and I knew that I was going to come out the other side with a portfolio and connections, and so that was important for me. So that was my biggest investment. But it's not for everybody. You don't have to have an MFA to be a writer by any stretch of the mind. But I do think the connections are important. I think in terms of my home office area, have a comfy chair. Especially because we're in quarantine, and if you're going to be doing a lot of Zoom calls, you don't want to be in a really like stiff-backed, uncomfy, like, you just make your environment feel like home, and make it feel like a place where you can come and sit down and write. Somebody told me once that if you make your writing space a certain way every time you write, like if you do like a diffuser, or if you have a flower or something, it's a Pavlovian response. So then your brain, when you sit in that space, you automatically tap into that creative whatever, because your brain is like, oh snap, this is our creative space. This is what I'm going to do. So that would be my advice, personally. Just make a comfy space for yourself. and get Final Draft if you're going to be a screenwriter.
I want to ask you something about. Do you prefer Final Draft or Celtics?
Final Draft.
Why? What's wrong with Celtics? I'm just curious.
Lena, go ahead.
I know we're getting away from the question. Sorry.
No, it's a big investment. Final Draft is it's not cheap. One thing that I'll say as a tip to people who are looking to invest in Final Draft, and you might not be able to bite the bullet with like the $100 or $110, put it out there on social media to see if anybody has their extra download available. That has saved me twice when I couldn't afford it. So that's something that I would just as a tip, but I would say invest in Final Draft. Even, there's screenwriting, but Final Draft also has templates for just about every medium of writing. So it's really helpful for a diverse range of artists. Part of it is because Final Draft literally saves as its own type of file. It's an FDX file, and Celtics would have to convert, and sometimes those conversions are really chunky and sloppy. Another thing is that Celtics is free for now, but they have installed paywalls before on certain aspects of their media, and they could at any moment put a paywall up for the features that you're enjoying right now. So I think it's might as well make the investment, and then you have something you can always go to.
Is that a one-time payment?
On Final Draft?
Yes.
Yes. Obviously, there's updates and upgrades that you can do as you want to, or as it becomes cumbersome. You can also use that software offline, which is really helpful, whereas Celtics, you need Wi-Fi, you need to be connected to the internet. And also, it's kind of... I don't want to say like a sign to people, but it does show that you're serious to the professional industry, and you're willing to use the tools that are the kind of industry standard for it. Whereas with Celtics, it kind of says that you're testing the waters is kind of the implication sometimes. So that would be my number one recommendation as far as the tools to invest in as well.
Okay. I'll go. I agree. I think for me, the biggest investment I made, and I mean, it's not really a financial, I guess it is a financial investment, but I made it a point to read a bunch, not just the how-to books or the educational books, but like other people's work. Because when you get, for me, especially switching from plays to screen, I had no clue. Like the first script I wrote was exactly like the first script I read. I didn't know where. What I mean is that I didn't know what room I had to where I had to differ between what I was thinking and the style versus the structure, because I didn't see it used in a multitude of ways. And it helped me develop my voice by it. Oddly enough, it helped me develop my voice by seeing all the voices and what stood out and what was the same. So I could differentiate between, okay, this is structure, this has to be there, but that is just a choice. So for me, that's what I would do. I would take every opportunity you can to pick up a book and read it, pick up a news article and read it, wordplay, and so that would be, to me, other than the other two things, I think education is the biggest part of it. So yeah, that's pretty much what I have. Yeah.
I agree with everyone. Invest in art. Invest in art. Invest in art. Go see plays. Watch Netflix. Watch Hulu. Don't feel guilty about it. You've got to be current. You've got to know what's out there and what's working. The only way you're going to know that is to support. And also, you want people to support your art. So there's reciprocity in this. So definitely, one of the biggest investments I've made is art. And I'm a poet, but I'm not just investing in poetry. I'm going to see plays. I'm going to well, when we could, I'm going to museums and art shows and things of that nature. So yeah, definitely feed artists and feed your art. And Durier's off.
I was going to say he's gone.
I also saw, and this is unrelated to writing, but my friend Ricky asked, did I play that crazy girl in Boys Town? I did. It was a lot of fun. Her name was Christy. It's a Canadian series. Look it up. It's great.
I'm going to find this now. That's awesome. Great. You are muted.
I actually wanted to say something. It popped back into my head when you were talking about finding an illustrator friend, that's another thing I would invest in. Friends, connections, networking, because it's social media. Social media is literally invest in social media. Social media, social media, social media. There's so many opportunities out there for you to find agents, for you to find illustrators, for you to find all these people that are right where you are and that are super talented and want to create with you. And I would invest in it in all sorts of ways: LinkedIn, YouTube. If you get a blog started, a video blog, document your process as a writer. People will watch that. So that's what I would say. All right. Did everyone go? No, Liz, go ahead.
Yeah. So for my question, yeah, awesome. So my question for you guys is, what is the biggest lesson you've learned since beginning your writing journey?
To listen.
To listen?
To listen. Yeah, to listen to people. And I know this kind of goes against what I mean, like for me, yeah, just listen to people when especially when people take the time to read something and give it feedback. Some of it's not, some of the great, but for the most part, if you've asked them to read it, then you got to trust what they tell you. So just listen.
Cool.
I'd say have more like self-confidence. I don't take the best advice in that category, especially. But like, yeah, make sure that you like don't like if you don't put it out there, it's never going to be out there. So like, don't be afraid to, and have more belief in yourself. Like there's a reason you're drawn to this. So you might as well, we only have so much time. So.
For me, I would say develop a thick skin. I once wrote a movie that I had read at kind of a round table thing, and in the feedback afterwards, it kind of got away from me. And by the end, like they had totally rewritten my movie, and I was so demoralized that I didn't touch it again for 2 years. And I think that it had a lot to do with where I was at as a writer in my confidence, like you were talking about, Megan, and also how I had structured that feedback. I wasn't ready for that kind of feedback. I wasn't mediating it in any meaningful way. And I wasn't thick-skinned enough to be able to hear it and not feel it in a way outside of how it was intended. So that's something, the strength and confidence and the resilience is something that I find really helpful as I've grown.
For me, I would say one of the things that has helped me grow as a writer is, again, going back to being a teaching artist, is I think it's important that we make ourselves available to people, to edit and read and offer feedback on work. We're oftentimes looking for someone to read our stuff, but I think the editing process works both ways. It's a symbiotic process. You can learn a lot as a writer from reading and revising work. So as much as I hated it at first, it's been a great practice, just making yourself available to others.
Yeah.
Did you go, Liz?
Huh? No, I was just enjoying everybody's answers.
Okay.
But no, so my answer is actually very similar to Lena's, in that I think when I first started out, I was far too emotionally attached to what I was doing and like my idea of what the project is. And everything does change, especially if it gets all the way to production. Like it's going to change. It's never going to look exactly like it is in your head. And you got to be okay with that and just roll with the punches and roll with the notes and all of the different things that go with it. Love your characters, and love your story, but also just be malleable as a person and just enjoy the process of it and don't get too caught up in trying to control everything.
Awesome. Those are great questions. If you're just joining us and you have a question that you want to ask, just put your question in the comments. Sometimes we don't get all the questions, so you can always message one of us, but try to message us in the comments and see if you can get your question answered on air. It's my turn and I'm excited. The question I want to ask is, how do you go about building dynamic characters? For me, I think as an actor who started from an actor and then moved to writing, character was everything, because your characters are literally what people fall in love with. The style is awesome too, but if you have a great stylistic piece and the characters are shit, then no one's gonna care. So you really have to invest in the character. So what I do when I want to make dynamic characters, I like to set up a lot of foliage. um, I didn't make up that word, but I used it like it was weird how I used it. Foil is a term that we use in theater for two characters that don't necessarily oppose each other, but they have characteristics or personality traits that either complement or negate in a way that enhances the tension. And I try to do that with a lot of my characters, especially with best friends. I love putting two characters side by side who are on the same side, but are totally different. And you see that a lot. When you think of like Guardians of the Galaxy, that whole team is a team of foils. You know what I mean? So when you do that, you end up, when you put that in your script and you've rooted your characters in realistic and multi-dimensional characters, not stereotypes, then they're naturally going to combat each other in a way that is productive for the story. And you'll find a lot of times that alone is enough to push your story forward. Not alone, but go ahead, Lena.
For me, the thing that makes writing specific characters the easiest is that specificity. Be as specific as you can as you're building them out in your head. It might not all make it into the script itself. You might not have the space in the dialogue, but having specificity is going to go a long ways, especially if you're writing a series and you have time to have these characters grow. The thing that specificity is going to give you, it's gonna make your job so much easier, because it's gonna become obvious who should do what, how they would react, who you want to put in what position. My husband has a series called The New Adventures of Peter and Wendy. You guys can watch it online if you'd like. And the characters that he built out, they're all so specific that to create the comedic language of the show became so obvious, like, oh my God, well, this type A person has to go in the situation where they're forced to be surrounded by disorganization, because that will be hilarious. You know what I mean? Like, it becomes really easy where to place them to get the effect that you want. And so if you're looking at a script, if you're looking at a story and you find vagueness in somebody, build them out. Think about their wants and needs, their likes and dislikes, and be as specific as you can, because that's how we are as people.
I mean, I think you pretty much encapsulated most of that answer with that, and I 100% agree with specificity. To piggyback, I would also say think about what your character's been doing prior to showing up in the script. Like what was their whole existence prior to this one moment that you put them in, and play with that. And then I think also I like to play with opposites a lot, because not everybody, no one in the world is one linear anything ever. And so just play with the specificity of those opposites and how it might get your other characters to react or not react, or is it a catalyst for them to do something specific that drives the story forward? What's the cause and effect of that? But yeah, what Lena said, specificity always.
I don't know if I have anything to really, yeah, I don't know if I have anything to add. Really, I definitely feel connected to Durier's method in a way, because we are trained actors. And so I think trained actors tend to think of character in such a, would this character be fun to play? And if they're not fun to play, then why are you writing them? Even if they're just like a tinier part, you've got to give them, I don't know. I just think there's the Shakespeare trope, no small parts, just small players or whatever. I think that you got to, it's just specifics again. I'm just saying the same stuff y'all did. So
I did want to say one more thing. When you're writing your characters, don't tell your characters what to do. Let your characters tell you what to do. And I know that sounds weird, but it's like sometimes I found myself with writer's block every time I'm trying to force a character to do something that is against what the character would do. And I'm like, man, I can't get past this scene or this chapter. Why? Because the character's like, hey, bro, I don't want to do that. I wanna go to the store, and you want me to go to friggin' Walmart. I want to go to 7-Eleven. So
when writers like, that's when TV shows get bad. Like when they get to like the 4th season, and you're suddenly like, that character would never do that. That is wild. They would never. You're like, no one would ever. Like, I remember watching. I was into Glee, and like these kids made fun of a guy who was like molested, and I was like, they would never do that.
Right.
And so it was just like became the season I just ignore completely when I rewatch it. But like, you're exactly right. Character integrity is like so important, and not integrity as in like they're a good person, but like their code of honor, ethics, or whatever they follow. If you venture away from that, you better be doing it for like a very specific reason, like they are intoxicated or whatever, And
usually that's a plot point.
Right, because again, like characters, like it will become obvious who would do what and who wouldn't if you're specific enough. I'll also add with characters, I feel like oh my god, I just lost my train of thought. Hold on, I'm gonna get it back. Baby Bren.
You gotta do what you gotta do.
You got this.
Right, what was it? Oh my god. Okay, so being specific and I'll think of it and then I'll add it in.
Character integrity.
It was okay. So one of the things when I was focused more on performing, which a lot of us have a lot of experience in performing, the way that I would break characters down is I would look at what they say about themselves and what other people say about them, and that's how a lot of your actors are going to approach it. So think about that. Like if there's something really critical that you want the performer to know, put it in there somewhere. Like make sure that they say that about themselves or that someone else says that about them. Like give the gifts to your performer that you're going to want them to use. And if not in the dialogue itself, then find a way to include it elsewhere in the script, whether it's in the scene direction or in building the scene, setting it up. I think that talking to performers about how they break characters down will tell you exactly how you need to include those tidbits into your script.
And for the writers out there who are not writing scripts, a lot of this still applies. A lot of it still applies because the character has to be just as dynamic maybe even more so on a novel because they're so lengthy and you really have to retain your audience's attention. Jonathan, I know you said you kind of said what Lena said, so do you want to respond to this?
No, I definitely agree with everything that's been said. I don't have anything extra to add. One of the things that we say in the poetry spoken word realm is like, always remember why you wrote it. Always remember why you wrote it. So that's something that carries me through my work. Even in my poems, I'm a spoken word comedian, so I have to encompass a lot of different characters in 3 minutes and 10 seconds. So a lot of my characters, what's important in my work is going to be the dialogue to differentiate the characters or whatever, because I have this deep husky voice. I'm not going to necessarily change that, but having like clear, crisp, distinct dialogue, keeping it real with how your characters talk, how they live.
Okay, so we had planned to each do 3 questions, but we're kind of coming up towards the end of our time. So I actually have one question that someone wrote in the group, and then I have another question, and then we'll just cap it with those last 2.
Great.
So the question from the group, I kind of tweaked it because it was more like a discussion. And so I tweaked it into a question, and it says, is stream of consciousness writing okay? Or do you find it easier / more effective to pre-plan and plot?
Ooh, good question. I'm a big fan of the vomit draft. Especially at the very beginning. Like I think it's like Duri and I had talked about this a lot. I do think it's important to not censor yourself when you first get an idea. And I think you should just vomit it all out and see what's on the page and then go back and try to make it more of a structured situation. Because I think that there's so many beautiful things that pop up when you first do that you're kind of doing yourself a disservice to do structure first and then put your ideas in. But I know people that don't always do that. So that's just for me.
For my personal preference with writing, I love an outline. I love an outline. I love thinking, what is my path from A to Z? Because when I think of a story, it's usually kind of like, I know the big things where I'm like, and then it'll be great, but I don't know how I get there. And for me, mapping out an outline, one, it helps me see if this idea holds water. You know, like, can I build a story around this idea? Is it strong enough? And two, it gives me these great little buoys that I can rest on as I go through the script, where I'm like, I just need to get to X. And then I get there, and then I rest, and I kind of assess and evaluate where I'm at. It also helps me fit within, it helps me get closer to the page count that I want. You know, if I'm thinking of it like I'm writing a 60-minute pilot, I want it to be no more than like 70 pages. Having a structure helps me stick in there, as opposed to prior to that, when I would write, sometimes I would box myself into a corner where I'd be like, I'm on page 85 and I haven't even gotten to the point. So for my personal preference, mapping out an outline first helps me really kind of chisel away those big chunks of rock before I get into the details. But it's all personal preference.
I would say for me, it depends on what I'm writing. Sometimes, like if it's spoken word poetry, I can do the vomit draft, and like I tell the kids,
that's a thing now.
Get it out. We'll make it pretty later, but just make sure you get it out. You don't want to lose a thing.
Yeah.
But if I'm writing a play or attempting to write something else that requires structure, I've got to have outline, or it will confuse me to no end. So it just depends on what I'm writing.
I think that I would go along with Jonathan on that one. Is when I took a creative writing class in college, we had a poetry segment, and I used to write a lot more poetry than I ever do now. But I remember specifically, like the first two, we didn't have to follow any kind of form or structure, but for the last one we did. And I remember the teacher saying, like, you really like to clearly your method of writing is like slapping a bunch of stuff on a page, like paint, and then like erasing it out, and like then but then when I had to work with a form, it kind of elevated some things about my writing. So I think that even if one works for you better than the other, I think always play with your form. Like, I find a lot of people that are great. I mean, David Bowie comes to mind because he's my very favorite artist, but he did a thing in 1975 called cutouts, where he would like write like a prolific line or like a short poem, and then he would cut it up, or like he found a sentence in a magazine, he loved it, he would like cut it up into these phrases or into these words, and then he would literally sit down like on a coffee table and like tape together a song. And like, I found out my favorite song by him for a while was written in that way. So it's just always kind of experiment with your form. And again, it definitely depends on what you're writing.
That was all great advice. And I agree. I think it really comes down to what works for you. And I realized something, this is really what I wanted to add. Don't let this choice be what stops you from writing. Because I've been there where it's like, well, I'm not going to write it until I have a plot point of a blueprint, and then it just never got written. So if you need to, it's much better for you to sit down and vomit than to like wait for this inspiration for this. If you have a story in your head and it's not coming out because you can't just put it on the page and then let that question answer itself, because it's better to have whatever's on that page than not have either, because you can't make this decision. So 100%. That's my biggest advice for there. Okay, and the last question is, how do you create realistic dialogue?
Say it out loud.
Oh, yes, there you go.
That's I get this a lot when I'm because I read a lot of scripts, and I end up revising a lot of dialogue to make it more organic and natural, and to make it sound like it's actually coming from like a human place. And the best way to do it is to just say it out loud, because you'll know if it sits weird in your mouth, then it's not how someone would say it. Also, eavesdrop, listen to people, and write things organically. We don't talk in linear, grammatically correct sentences. We don't have these hard and fast pauses. Like, we break things up and we chunk them up. And if you want your actor's performance to be really natural and organic, give them the gift of writing that in. A really great example, a recent example of this would be Marriage Story. That movie sounds like it's highly improvised. It's not. That's exactly how it's written in the script. Every start and stop is scripted. And so if you're looking for creating realistic dialogue, that is a movie that I would watch as a great example of how to do that. That said, Marriage Story with Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson. I would highly recommend that one. That said, a lot of actors will naturalize your dialogue on their own because, like, they're going to get in that booth and they're going to be like, that's not how, I'm just going to say it how a human would say it. But make the shortcuts for them and say it out loud. That's my best advice.
Yeah, I would say I found myself when I would write plays talking out loud to myself all the time. I'd be like, I'd say the sentence that I wanted before the next sentence and then answer it. I also think even if you're not an actor, whatever, it is so beneficial as a writer to take an improv class. My writing got so much better. There was a summer I worked at the Springer and I did improv every single day, like long form improv with a group of people. And my writing had been more frequent and it was better. I mean, I wish I could like go to an improv class all the time or find friends. If you already know how to improvise with some friends, because I think it is masterful for dialogue, knowing how people talk in a moment.
That's really good advice.
I'll also add real quickly, because obviously, like, we are individuals and we have our lived experience. If you're writing a period piece, if you're writing a piece that is within a community that you are not necessarily super familiar with, immerse yourself so that it does become your new natural speak. Because otherwise, it's going to be inauthentic and it's going to ring false right away. So that's another way to write realistic dialogue if you're looking at, other genres.
Or get a partner.
Yeah, or partner up, collaborate with someone who like is super well versed in whatever it is that you're trying to build out.
Yep. Another option is to submit your script to our Wine and Read series, where we will all read it out loud and we will all give you notes.
Yes.
Yes. Sometimes it takes listening to it to hear those problem spots. Because sometimes the things that you say in your common vernacular is not at all what the rest of the world does. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But by hearing other people read it, you notice where they pause and they're like, oh gosh, let me take this moment to look at the sentence. And then you're like, that's something that needs to change. Yeah. Circle that one and all red, change it. So yeah, submit your scripts to us and we can help.
I have nothing to add.
For me, when it comes to dialogue, I watch a lot of TV, to be honest, and reality shows. Not like some reality shows are like really obviously scripted, and I literally mean scripted, like they're writing this stuff on paper. Some are like manipulated, where they're like, "Hey, ladies, y'all are gonna talk about the ski trip, and these are the points," but they're still improvising it, right? So that's great because they're not actors, they're not trained, they're just literally like hitting these points, and you see how they talk. And then you always tell when a reality show goes from like the scripted part, then something real happens, and then that goes away. So that's why I like that, because it's a good balance of all these things. And I just listen to how people talk when they're and I eavesdrop and everything like that. I really think it's important to, like Liz said, just to kind of piggyback on that, getting people who aren't you to read it, because I know reading it out loud helps, but it definitely helps when other people are reading, because then you get to hear what flavor they put on it. Is it enough that you're giving to really have them play with it? Now, specifically for people who are not writing scripts, it is difficult because sometimes your dialogue sounds too much like a narrator. Try not to make because like Lena said, people don't speak perfectly. So your dialogue doesn't have to be perfect. That's the one place in a novel where you can literally let loose. Okay, well, that is all that I have for today, and we're right at the hour. So I want to thank all of the people, Lena, Jonathan, Megan, and Liz, for being here for the panel. This actually was a lot of fun. I love this. If you all like this, or if you'd like to be a part of our Wine and Reads series, and you're not already joined, and you're not already part of the Writers Room, please join us. The Writers Room is a Facebook group, and we have weekly Wine and Reads where either we do something like this, or we have a writers roundtable. We have a lot of writer on writer work and education. So please be a part of that. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you all have a good weekend. Stay safe, and please wear your masks.
Woo!
Bye, guys.
Bye.